Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Earlier today, the winter session of Parliament ended, bringing to a close one of the most divisive and bitter periods in India's parliamentary history. Ever since the beginning of demonetisation on November the 8th and increasingly thereafter, there's been a sharp and deep divide, literally separating the opposition from the government. With me to talk about the last 35 days and in particular demonetisation, Parliament, as well as the divide in Indian politics, is former Minister and now Congress MP from Thiruvananthapuram, Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, let's start with Rahul Gandhi's claim, and I'm going to quote his words. It is personal corruption of the PM that we have detailed information of. And he went on to say that when this information becomes public, he would explode what he called the Prime Minister's balloon, and the Prime Minister was terrified. After raising such a serious allegation against the Prime Minister, doesn't Rahul Gandhi have a duty to share with the country what he knows?
I believe he will. In fact, he wanted, as a parliamentarian, to reveal whatever it was he's going to reveal in Parliament. That would have been the right place. Today, with the last chance to do so having gone, I'm convinced he will choose a forum outside and go ahead and reveal whatever it was that he was going to reveal.
You
it's
say
a very
you're
serious
convinced
matter.
he'll choose a forum outside. Mr. Gandhi has maintained that he will only speak in Parliament. And now the problem is that if he waits till the next session of Parliament, he'll be waiting till the third week of January, and that is really almost an impossible situation for the country. Or he has to hold an early press conference and go public. At the moment, Mr. Gandhi hasn't given any indication of what he plans to do.
That's right. He hasn't given an indication to me either, Karan, so I can't answer the question, other than to say that obviously if Parliament did not provide him a platform on which to say this, or to say anything at all for that matter, then he would have no choice but to examine his options. And I believe one of those options, perhaps the favoured option, should be to actually go ahead and tell the nation from some other platform.
I'll tell you why I'm pursuing this. 48 hours and a bit more have lapsed since he actually went public with this allegation. Yeah. It's a very serious allegation that questions the integrity of the Prime Minister, the highest office holder in the land. Now, having made this, to then keep quiet and not actually reveal what he knows and then back it up with proof is not just irresponsible, some would say it's almost immoral.
Well, look, I mean, let's not conclude that he's not going to say it. I'm sure he will. It's just a question of his choosing the place and the time, which I think is his prerogative. None of us quite knows what it is he's going to say, but it's clearly going to be important enough and earth-shaking enough, and that's one of the reasons we suspect that the government was so palpably unwilling to let Parliament function.
Well, I'll come to Parliament not functioning a moment's time, but when you say it's his prerogative to choose when and in what way, it is undoubtedly, but he can't take so much time over it. 48 hours have passed, and if you've accused the Prime Minister of corruption and done it so publicly, and in a way as to suggest that when you reveal it, you will create an earthquake, then the onus is on you to go public immediately. 48 hours is already too much time.
Well, who took away those 48 hours from Rahul Gandhi? It wasn't Rahul Gandhi. I mean, the point is that the government actually chose deliberately to obstruct the functioning of the Lok Sabha, whether it was because they were afraid of what he was going to say or not. He, as an MP, decided to do what was necessary for MPs to do, which is to speak in Parliament, whereas a Prime Minister who's also an MP has not seen fit to bring to the Lok Sabha the policy on demonetisation with which he stunned the nation.
You know, you said the Parliament was an opportunity for Rahul Gandhi to go public and he wasn't given the time or he wasn't given the opportunity to speak there. That's actually contestable because the government has made it crystal clear that they were very keen for Rahul Gandhi to speak. The only problem was Congress insisted Rahul Gandhi had to be the first to speak either on Wednesday or Thursday. Apparently, there was a back-channel understanding whereby, in fact, that had been informally agreed to, and the BJP then reneged and insisted that Arun Jaitley should speak first. But even if that's true, so what? Why does Rahul Gandhi have to speak first? It's the content that matters, not the chronological order of the speakers.
The so what is quite simply this. There is now such a level of mistrust between the opposition and the government that many in the opposition, not just our party, were convinced that if the government minister spoke first, the BJP would then proceed to disrupt the House after they've laid out their side of the story, and the opposition would not get a chance to indict the government, indeed to disapprove of the government's demonetisation policy. They said, since the Prime Minister has unleashed this on the nation, we have a right to tell him what's wrong with this. And ideally, if he had come to the Parliament and asked to speak first, no one would have challenged it. But to get a minister to merely repeat the government side of the story and then perhaps deprive the opposition of a chance to rebut would not have been acceptable.
So a serious allegation of corruption against the Prime Minister couldn't be made public because Rahul Gandhi didn't have the chance to speak first. I mean, most people will find that bizarre. And if the government had done what you say they would have done, which is not allowed Rahul to speak, he'd have actually then had added injustice on his side in addition to the revelation he has to make. And he would have had a more powerful impact.
No, but actually, if you look at it this way, that Parliament is a forum that the opposition believes it can use to its advantage in skewering the government for this extremely unpopular and frankly...
Which you didn't use to that effect at all.
Badly implemented policy. And then that opportunity is denied to it, but the government seizes the platform for itself. It would actually be an own goal of the opposition to allow the government to speak.
You know what people say? People say the reason why Rahul is insisting that he will only reveal this on the floor of Parliament, and that up till now is his position, is because in fact he knows that were he to do this outside Parliament, he'd be done for libel. He needs, in other words, the immunity of speaking on the floor of the House to protect him. He hasn't got the confidence of what he's got to reveal, otherwise he would have said it in public.
No, I believe that that option has not been ruled out of saying it in public, and frankly, he's already had to take a few defamation suits on the chin. Perhaps one more will not make that much of a difference to him.
And there was a moment in time, when in fact it seemed as if he was trying to wriggle out of the RSS defamation because he was almost willing to apologize. Then he changed his mind. So, you know, he hasn't quite taken it on the chin.
No, he has, and that's not the only case. There have been a few others filed against him in various courts. But the point about that is that Rahul Gandhi has always said that he will speak his mind and face the consequences, whether they're legal ones or political ones.
The Economic Times has reported yesterday that at the meeting that Rahul Gandhi had with Congress MPs on Wednesday, you asked him for details of this allegation that he had, and according to the paper, you were told that this would be revealed at an appropriate forum and time. And thereafter, you kept quiet. Why is Rahul Gandhi unwilling to share with his most senior MPs the devastating information he has?
No, first of all, he didn't want, I think quite understandably, to remove the sting from an accusation he was going to make by revealing it in a forum from which, as you've just indicated, leaks have occurred. So if indeed he had answered my question, undoubtedly that would have leaked and that would have completely taken away the element of Rahul Gandhi making this attack.
Except it wasn't just at this forum, as you say, where there were 40, 50 MPs present, and I can understand that one of those may have leaked. It now emerges from the Indian Express of this morning that important people like Mallikarjun Kharge, Ghulam Nabi Azad, Anand Sharma, and they are the three most senior Congress MPs, have no idea what he has to say. Kharge has actually gone on record to say, I didn't ask, but more importantly, Rahul Gandhi hasn't told me.
Yes, I understand that he has kept this to himself, and he will unveil it to the nation and to all of us at the appropriate time and in the appropriate place. Parliament was the appropriate place, and this week was the appropriate time. He wasn't allowed to speak. Now he'll have to find another time and forum.
Except it's not just your own party's most senior MPs who've been kept in the dark, and deliberately so.
The nation is waiting to hear.
Rahul's allies who were surrounding him, the senior leaders of your allied parties who were surrounding him at that press conference, have also gone on record to say they hadn't the faintest idea, and still haven't the faintest idea, what Rahul is referring to, what information he has. Isn't it surprising that even top allies who actually were there with him at the press conference have been kept in the dark?
Look, I think some friends, mutual friends of yours and me, would consider it a masterpiece of media management. Keep the media interested, keep them in suspense, have them speculating about it until the star of the show then unveils a story. I think actually in many ways it's the kind of thing we should do more of.
Masterpiece of media management possibly, but look at the words that Rahul used, because that suggests something else. I'm going to quote him again. It is personal corruption of the PM that we, note the word, we have detailed information of. And then, looking around at all the other allies who are with him, he added, we all have that information. Who's we, unless he's using it in the royal sense?
No, I don't think he meant in the royal sense.
So then who's we?
There would have been those who've actually unearthed the information and given it to him, whoever they are.
But he looked around at the allies and pointed to them, and all of them have now gone on record to say that they know nothing. So the people he was pointing towards when he used the word we are in the dark. Who's he talking about?
Look, Karan, this is only good. There's no point grilling me to tell you something I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And like Mr. Kharge and the others, we are waiting for Rahul Gandhi to tell the nation. And we will find out when he's ready to have us find out.
Before I move on, there's one, therefore, telling conclusive question that needs to be asked. Rahul has built up impatience, tension, and drama in such a huge way that most people ask if what he has to reveal isn't truly dramatic and earth-shattering, if it doesn't actually create the earthquake he said it would, it will be a damp squib, and more importantly, it will reverberate badly on him. He now runs a huge risk that if what he has to say isn't worth waiting for, he himself will be embarrassed, not Mr. Modi.
Look, I think you can be pretty sure that Rahul Gandhi would not have said what he has said if he didn't believe the information that he wishes to reveal would truly be devastating in its implications. And I think you really ought to give him enough respect to wait for him to say it and then judge whether it's a damp squib or an exclusive
Are people in Congress becoming a little concerned by the fact that he's built up the tension and pressure so dramatically that if what he has to say turns out to be a chuhiya, then in fact there will be a problem that he would have created for himself?
Look, I don't think there's any reason to believe there is going to be a chuhiya. Maybe it'll be a pahad. Let's wait and see.
All right, let's then move to something else. Let's come to the handling of Parliament, and I want to point out to you that with the exception of the last 2 days, in the upper house, and I'm talking first about the Rajya Sabha, the opposition, with the possible exception of 1.5 days, actually deliberately disrupted the House right through on the grounds that not only did the Prime Minister have to participate, but he had to be present right through the debate. Now, that is not just high-handed, that's a silly demand of any Prime Minister, particularly when there's an economic crisis in the country.
Created by?
Him, no doubt, but nonetheless he needs to attend to it as well. And surely that has to have greater priority.
Well, I think the first and most disappointing thing is that the Prime Minister of the nation did not see fit to come to the temple of democracy, his phrase, and reveal to them his logic behind undertaking such a devastating sea change in the country's economic fortunes. We were on course to be the fastest growing economy in the world, major economy in the world this year. We've just taken a huge pummeling on that. And why? The stated goals of this policy have shifted at least 3 times since he announced them.
Except for the fact that you have a point when you say that he didn't come himself at the very start to explain to Parliament, but when
to announce the policy.
But thereafter, when the government was willing to debate, you deliberately set a condition that not only must the Prime Minister participate, he has to be present right through. And I put it to you, that's high-handed, and it ignores the fact that the PM has other important things to do. That put the opposition in the wrong.
Well, I'd argue that Jawaharlal Nehru had important things to do, and he attended many debates in full. So did Indira Gandhi, and so did Mr. Vajpayee on a number of occasions. So I think the important thing to stress is, had you had a finite debate, let's say 1 or 2 speakers per party, and was done in a day and a half, there was no earthly reason why the Prime Minister could not have attended Parliament for a day and a half. So it's not as high-handed and irrational as you suggest. In many parliamentary systems, a Prime Minister does that. But no doubt, had he shown a conciliatory spirit of seeking Parliament's approval, as the law and constitutional practice would imply that he's required to do, then I suspect the attitude would have been different. It's rather the high-handedness of the government in not sending the Prime Minister to Parliament that has provoked this kind of opposition.
I question whether the attitude would have been different in any circumstances, because the truth of the matter is, you first, as an opposition in the Rajya Sabha, began by disrupting the House on the grounds the Prime Minister must be present right through. Then you changed and demanded an apology from the Prime Minister for remarks that you claimed were offensive to the opposition.
They were, yet.
Finally, last Friday, when nothing else could be thought of, you actually ensured that your own members were absent so there wasn't a quorum. And I put it to you that you have sought devious but sometimes novel and certainly very imaginative ways of ensuring that the House doesn't function, and succeeded. And the real reason was you didn't want to debate. What you wanted was a tamasha.
I disagree profoundly, and I'll tell you why, because there are 2 houses in this equation. The house of which I'm a member, the local
which I'll come to in a moment's time.
Well, yes, but I mean, they both went in parallel. You see, I mean, very, very often, the leaderships of both houses, of all parties, the ruling party and the opposition parties, were in consultation with their counterparts in the other house. And the objective was very simple. We wanted the Prime Minister to present the policy. He refused to do so. We wanted to be able to speak under a rule that permitted a vote. Why? Because in parliamentary practice that implies a censure of the government.
Only if you win the vote. Yeah, if you don't, there's no censure. And I'll come now to the Lok Sabha.
That's exactly our point. You've just made my point. Why was the government afraid of permitting a vote if they were so sure they had right on their side? They would not have been censured.
Why was the opposition so keen on a vote when you don't have the numbers on your side and you know you lose it? That's the question I'm going to put to you. Because the tactic
still
in the
believe
Lok
it would have
Sabha,
been extremely interesting to the nation to see who actually would have voted with the government.
your only possible hope was to try and divide the government and ensure that the Shiv Sena didn't vote with the government. But at the end of the day, it became crystal clear that the Shiv Sena was not insisting on a debate under a motion with a vote, and therefore even that tactic would not have worked. And I come back again. To have held up the Lok
That's
Sabha.
one small party that's not insisting on a vote. The majority of opposition parties were insisting on a vote.
But the majority of opposition parties taken together are still less than 1/3 of the House. The government as a whole has a 2/3 majority, and you'd have won. They would have won hands down.
We would have probably lost the vote in the Lok Sabha.
Not probably, undoubtedly.
But with a very different margin from perhaps that which the government would like to have seen on the boards. Apart from which, had there been a vote in the Rajya Sabha, I don't think the result would have been a foregone conclusion.
Can I put this to you? Well, anyway, you'd already begun debating in the Rajya Sabha on a motion without a vote, so there would have been no vote in the Rajya Sabha at all. So that was ruled out. But to come back to the Lok Sabha, to hold up the Lok Sabha for a demand that the debate has to happen under a motion which has a vote at the end of it, works against your interest for the simple reason you'd have lost the vote. You would have won the debate possibly because you have good speakers, your points may have been better than the government's, but you'd have lost the vote, and if you lost the vote, the headlines would have been with the government, not you. This tactic wasn't suited to your interest, and yet you pursued it to the end.
Well, look, I'm not a party floor manager or leader, so I can't, explain the policy fully, other than to say that...
Is there a noted dissent?
Other than to say that the element of censure was important to the party leadership, and at the same time, yes, I would have felt that beyond the point we should have gone in for a debate, and as you know, we did change from that position.
In the last 2 days only.
No, before that we switched from the adjournment motion formula to another rule, 184.
But even that has a vote.
We said give up any rule, we'll vote.
That happened only in the last 2 days. It's only in the last 2 days.
Well, the last week, the last 3 days. But during that time, unfortunately, the Parliament was not allowed to function by the Treasury benches, which is quite unprecedented in parliamentary practice.
In the last 2 days, I accept that the Treasury benches did their bit to hold up Parliament, but till then it was you. Just look at this situation from the point of view of the Indian people. Demonetization has caused enormous pain and suffering, perhaps even incalculable pain and suffering. The people of India expected and wanted the opposition to hold the government to account on the floor of the House. By finding devious tactics to actually disrupt the House and not permit a debate to happen, not only have you let the government off the hook, more importantly, you've let down the people of India.
Now, on this issue of whether we should debate or we should disrupt, my views are very clear. I don't believe I've been sent by my voters to Parliament to disrupt. I believe I've been sent there to give voice to their feelings. But as you know, our political culture has evolved in a manner in which, to quote the now Finance Minister, Mr. Jaitley, when he was in opposition, disruption has been enshrined as a legitimate parliamentary tactic in India. And for me, as a relative Johnny-come-lately, to say you can't do this when it's been practiced by the ruling party when it was in opposition for 10 years, frankly makes me look simply naive. So I've stopped saying so. I'm shutting up.
Did you at any point of time, perhaps behind closed doors, suggest to your party leaders that this is not a wise tactic? That at the end of the day, you're letting down the people of India, you're letting down democracy?
Karan, anything that I say behind closed doors to any of my party colleagues remains behind closed doors, so there's no point saying it. I do believe that there are others like me who would prefer debate to disruption on any day of the week on any issue. But
within the Congress party?
Yes, within the Congress party. But we are loyal and disciplined soldiers of the party. And if the party says that the position is going to be to do unto the BJP what it has done unto us when we were in power, which is essentially the golden rule of Indian politics today, and therefore that we will disrupt as they have disrupted for 10 years, I'm afraid those of us who don't agree nonetheless feel solidarity with the party and stand with them. Not because we enjoy disruption, not because we share Mr. Jaitley's view that disruption is legitimate, but because India's parliamentary culture has sadly evolved to such a point that this is the accepted practice.
And the corollary to this parliamentary eye to eye is that, in fact, you will end up with Parliament dysfunctional and worse still, with important issues that matter to the people never aired and discussed.
Well, this is precisely the argument that I raised when we were in power and the BJP was disrupting. I've written a number of op-eds and articles and essays and chapters of books arguing against this. I can tell you that before I entered politics, the then Speaker Somnath Chatterjee convened a group of so-called eminent Indians, 8 or 10 of us, around a table to discuss the functioning of Parliament. Mr. Narayan Murthy was there, Shyam Benegal was there, a few other eminent citizens, and one of the questions he asked us was what to do about disruption. And when I naively said, well, why don't you just suspend the people who disrupt? He said that would be considered undemocratic. It can only be done with an all-party consensus. Now, if that is the case, I hope that an all-party consensus can be achieved to change this culture, but I do not think it can be achieved now when the party that has benefited from disrupting in opposition for 10 years happens to be in power.
But you're saying something...
It can only be done when we get close to an election whose results are unknown, where nobody can benefit from such an agreement. I would hope and pray that sometime in early 2019, the parliamentary leaders of all parties can agree that for the next parliament onwards, anyone who disrupts will be suspended. But until that kind of all-party agreement, we can't do it.
So what you're saying in a nutshell is that the Speaker of the Lok Sabha should not only have the powers, but exercise the powers to suspend, to admonish, to send out, even briefly, a recalcitrant member, and to exercise them with the fearlessness with which the Speaker in the House of Commons or the Speaker in the Australian House of Representatives are. Because there, even the Prime Minister is often admonished in public by the Speaker.
Correct. And the only thing is that that's their culture, and sadly it has not been our culture in the last 25 years. So I do hope that we can restore our culture to what it was in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and what it is in other parliamentary systems. Otherwise, we should just end the pretense that this parliamentary system is working as the right forum to express the voices of people. Right now, public opinion is actually heard on the media, on television channels, not in Parliament.
And which is very sad, but very telling. One last question on Parliament before I come to demonetisation itself as a subject. You come from a state, Kerala, where in fact the suffering is acute. You sent delegations to Delhi from your government to try and meet with the Prime Minister, and he was reluctant to meet them. What would you say to the people of your constituency who turn around and say, we wanted our concerns raised in Parliament, we wanted them brought to the attention of the government, but because the opposition as a whole decided to disrupt rather than debate, our concerns have been ignored. Your people are the losers, your constituents are the losers.
Well, I've ensured they're not the losers by actually expressing their concerns in other forums and conveying them to the government, including in letters to the ministers concerned and so on. And I'm sure other MPs have done the same thing. But I agree that it's not a substitute for Parliament. Parliament is the place where we should have had this debate, and I do regret that we didn't.
Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to demonetisation itself and ask you, how does your party respond to the statement made by Dr. Manmohan Singh on the floor of the House and the fact that thereafter he seems to have subtly but significantly moved away from some of the things he said? And more importantly, how do you view the sharp divide that's come to be in Indian politics? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point, and I'm talking to former Congress Minister and MP from Thiruvananthapuram, Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, let's come to Dr. Manmohan Singh's speech in the Rajya Sabha, which in some ways has attracted enormous attention. I'm not going to bring up the individual comments, which are basically his personal opinion. That's his concern. I want to talk about one factual claim that he made, which attracted a lot of attention. He said that demonetization would lead to a 2% hit on GDP. And
he said 1 to 2.
No, he didn't. He said specifically 2. I heard him very, very carefully, and I've heard him repeatedly.
All right.
He said specifically 2%, and he added that was an underestimate, suggesting it would be more than 2%. Now, roughly 10 days later, he wrote a very thoughtful op-ed for The Hindu, where he repeated his personal comments, but this 2% claim was left out. I've checked with your party spokesman. Anand Sharma says that the entire content of his speech is something the Congress party endorses, supports and agrees with. But it seems to me, therefore, that both Dr. Manmohan Singh and the Congress party are trying to wriggle out of that 2% hit claim.
As I recall the speech, Karan, clearly you can play the tape and I don't have it, and I don't have the access to it that you have. I recall him saying 1 to 2%, but the point is, there is no doubt that there will be a hit. The Reserve Bank of India, the cheerleaders of demonetization responsible for its implementation, have themselves revised downwards their forecast for India's growth in the current fiscal from a wildly optimistic 7.6 to 7.1.
But that was because of the poor performance of the economy in Q2 before demonetization happened, and the governor made that clear as well.
But if you're going to go down 0.5% already because of just a poor performance, imagine what's happening in Q3 and Q4 when evidence throughout the country suggests the hit is going to be so much worse, where so many workers are not being employed because there's no money to pay them, where daily wage workers have lost jobs, mandis are shut, small and medium enterprises and micro enterprises are closing down, some perhaps permanently because they won't have the capital to reopen. It's a disaster, and it's impossible that it won't be a significant hit on GDP.
Well,
look at foreign institutional investors. How much have they pulled out of the country?
But
do you know
they
that
haven't pulled out because of demonetization? They've pulled out actually for a different reason, which is to do with the fact that the Fed has increased rates. As a result of which, it becomes more profitable for them to keep their money in America.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the factors we have to think about. But in the first 5 days of December, just before the Fed actually raised their rates, in those 5 days, double the amount of money was pulled out of this country than the entire month of October.
Let's come back to Dr. Manmohan Singh. First, I want to clarify for you, and you can check it on the tape, that he spoke specifically and said 2%, not 1 to 2%, and he added 2% was an underestimate. But the important point is
I fear he's right.
Well, we don't know. But the reason is he didn't repeat it, and because he didn't repeat it, many people have got the feeling that this is such an important thing not to repeat that he's wriggling out of it. And I'll tell you one reason, again, why people think he's backing away. 13 independent agencies have estimated what the hit to Indian GDP will be. 11 out of 13 have said it will be under 1%. One has said it will be 1%. Ambit put it considerably higher, which means Dr. Manmohan Singh is in a small minority of 2 out of 13. That's another reason why, on consideration, he probably said, let me drop this claim from my Hindu article. Isn't it odd that he actually went so far out on a limb to specify 2% and call it an underestimate, and then have to, forgive my word, try and wriggle out of it?
Well, you'd have to ask him to explain his own thought process on this. I actually am quite convinced that the news is not going to be good at the end of the current fiscal. I am convinced that 1% is a very optimistic estimate rather than a high-end estimate, and that we may well end up closer to the 2% mark that Dr. Manmohan Singh has mentioned. But whether he is actually backing off from that or simply didn't see it necessary to put a speculative comment about the future into an analytical comment about the present, that could be his editorial judgment. You'll have to ask him.
Let's come to demonetization. When it was initially announced by the government, Mr. Modi made it clear that it was being done for 2 reasons. A, to tackle black money, and B, to tackle counterfeit currency. Since then, the Prime Minister seems to have moved away from these 2 justifications, and he talks instead about making the country cashless and making it digital. To begin with, do you believe demonetization will be an effective way of tackling black money and counterfeit currency? I'll come to cashless later.
No, to be very honest, I think that everyone has realized by now that a lot of black money is actually not in cash at all. It's in land and gold and bullion and foreign exchange and buildings abroad and all sorts of things. And as a result, the money that people had kept in their hands seems to flood back into the banks. If you just look at the actual numbers we're hearing, and you also have evidence of police raiding people with vast amounts of freshly minted, printed new notes, clearly there have been some people colluding with people in authority, bankers or others, to launder large sums of money in exchange for these notes. So something has clearly gone wrong in that objective, and I don't believe that it's going to flush any black money out, and certainly the dividend that was projected in the first couple of days of money that would not come back into the system, that dividend isn't happening.
In fact, on that point, I want to say that both the Revenue Secretary Hansmukh Adhia as well as the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Arvind Panagria, both have separately said that it is not just possible, but we should expect all of the 15.4 lakh to come back into the system. If that happens, would it mean that in fact this attempt to tackle black money has failed?
Well, I think so. I mean, they keep shifting the goalpost, Karan, but clearly that was not what they intended or expected. If you look at the background briefings that were given to the media in the first few days after November 8th, people were confidently saying that between 3 and 4 lakh crores would never come back into the system, and that would be a windfall for the government of India, for the Reserve Bank, and eventually perhaps for the poor Indian. Well, I'm sorry, it looks like it's all coming back.
Which means that there was either no black money or it's been laundered. There can't be a third explanation.
Well, I think it's been laundered. I think we all know there certainly was some black money. We are against black money. And, the thing is, this might have worked in a different way, but it's not worked this way.
What about the vision the Prime Minister has recently begun to sketch out for the country of making it cashless, of digitalizing the economy? Do you share that vision, or do you tend to agree with former Governor of the RBI, Bimal Jalan, who says it's a great idea, but it's 50 years ahead of its time?
Yeah, well, it's at least 15 years ahead of its time, if not 50, and I'll tell you why. I actually do believe in the long term it's a good direction for India to go, but you need to build the backbone first. You need to build the digital infrastructure of this country. We have a country in which, very sadly, if you look at a league table of the top 90 countries in the world in terms of broadband speeds, we are at 89th position. We have some of the slowest broadband speeds in the world. Secondly, our digital infrastructure is so weak, the last mile connectivity in various places, particularly rural India, doesn't exist. Third, we don't even have reliable electricity yet. Can you imagine asking a poor rural villager to put all his money in a phone, which is running low on battery just when he needs the money and he can't charge it because there's no electricity at that time? I mean, we're looking at a situation in which until we get the horse first, we want to already pile up on the cart. And I think it's wrong. We need to first create the infrastructure and then move towards cashlessness. Maybe it need not take 50 years. If the government of today and of tomorrow is efficient, it can be done in 10 or 15. But it certainly can't be done today the way in which this ever-shifting goalpost has taken us towards this argument.
One more question about demonetization. Right through this 5-week process, there's been a lot of suppressed criticism, and now it's becoming vocal about the attitude, manner and behavior of the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Urjit Patel. One of your colleagues in Parliament, Jairam Ramesh, has criticized him quite directly. Many people say that at a time when we should have heard him, he's been silent. At a time when he should have been visible, he's virtually invisible. Do you share that criticism that perhaps the Governor hasn't risen to the occasion as he should have?
I actually respect the old convention, Karan, that politicians should not criticize civil servants by name, simply because they're not in a position to strike back in the same forum. So I will not name any individuals, but I do share the view that all those associated with this decision, starting with the Prime Minister and those officials implicated with him in this decision, should have come to the nation, should have laid out their thought processes, should have, as it were, held our hands through the chaos that ensued, and frankly also should have planned better. Why was not enough currency printed to replace the notes that were going to become illegal? Why did nobody think of making them the same size as the old notes so they could fit into the ATM machines? Why is the recalibration taking so absurdly long? These are basic issues of planning and foresight which seem to have been absent in the original conception of the scheme. And that's why I believe we'll never know whether demonetization might have worked because they planned it so badly.
Let's not name officials. But a lot of the things that haven't happened and should have happened, a lot of the planning that wasn't done but should have been done, is planning that should have been done by the Reserve Bank. Do you think the Reserve Bank as an institution has actually failed to fulfill its responsibilities?
I would say that the government has failed to fulfill its responsibilities of preparing itself adequately, planning properly, briefing itself on its own capacities, including such simple things as printing of notes at adequate quantities in the time available, which I believe is not just the Reserve Bank but also the Ministry of Finance, which was in charge initially of printing the 500 rupee notes. All of these things, frankly, show a collective failure of the government, and the buck stops with the Prime Minister. I'm sorry.
And the blame therefore rests with him?
I'm afraid he has taken ownership of this policy, Karan, through his initial television announcement. We can only point fingers at him.
Let's come finally to the sharp divide that's happened in Indian politics, not just today, but as you watch and look back right through the winter session. And each day it seems to have got worse. Would you agree with the view that this is not just unhealthy, this suggests that our democracy somehow is becoming dysfunctional, and it is not in India's interest that this should continue?
There I agree that I'm really appalled by the level of mistrust that exists between the Treasury benches and the opposition. I must say, even during the bad old days of the BJP disrupting us, I got the impression that our ministers were able to keep open channels of communication, make concessions, reach out to the opposition. The Prime Minister even inviting the leader of the opposition to breakfast on contentious issues on which they disagreed. We see very little of that kind of reaching out today. The government seems to see itself behind some sort of impregnable fortress wall. and the opposition as sort of mudslingers besieging the fort, as it were. That's not what democracy is all about, and that's not the way the government should be treating the opposition.
Perhaps the worst aspect of this deep divide is that there seems to be a sharp personal animosity that's been created between Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi. They're meant to be opponents, but more often they look like enemies. Does that worry you?
I would agree that in democracy, your opponents are not your enemies. They're your adversaries, they're not your enemies, and they should not be seen as your enemies. After all, Mr. Modi is my Prime Minister and your Prime Minister, even if I disagree with him on a lot of things. At the same time, he needs to reach out and show respect to the people of the opposition who one day might take his seat. I think it's important that he understands that this is a mutual process of give and take, and at the moment there hasn't been enough of it being attempted from his side.
I can understand your answering in a way that suggests that perhaps the initiative has to be taken by Mr. Modi, but the ordinary Indian, when he looks at what is increasingly a bitter personal quarrel between these two, his response or her response is, they need to have their heads knocked together.
Well, you know, Rahul Gandhi has asked for a meeting with the Prime Minister to present to him a list of demands that he collected during his Kisan
Well, he
Yatra
met the
meeting.
Prime Minister today. He met the Prime Minister for 5 minutes, and many people were surprised the Prime Minister met him, and Rahul wanted to meet him after Rahul had gone public, saying that he had proof of the Prime Minister's corruption. But that meeting did happen.
Exactly. So that's, I think, a slightly refreshing sign that, you know, there is an initiative from
You
the leader.
see hope in that meeting? No one else did.
Well, hope that at least they're talking to each other, they're willing to meet with each other. Initiative taken by the opposition, I might add, in this particular instance.
The Prime Minister is quoted to have said to Rahul Gandhi, we should meet more often. Does that mean the PM also took an initiative? I mean, frankly speaking, this to us looks like a bit of a parliamentary fast that went on between the two of them. Let's be honest.
We should meet more often, followed up by a tangible invitation or two, I think would be a different story.
But don't you think the time has come when both need to actually grow up and say, there is something more important than just my party's political interests or my own personal interests as a politician. The functioning of Indian democracy is at stake, and we both need to behave better. And perhaps in particular, Rahul Gandhi should be told, you don't go around in public accusing the Prime Minister of corruption and then not go public with the details or proof that you have.
Karan, don't be so impatient about that. I'm sure he will go public in due time. But let me say that the temple of democracy is not going to be a sacred place if its own high priests don't honor the principles, the values, the rituals, if you want to extend the metaphor, that temple is supposed to practice. So I agree with you. It'll be good to have a healthy, functioning parliament in which people talk to each other, respect each other, listen to each other, and occasionally accept barbs against each other, because that's what debate should be all about. We're not seeing that.
So would you, in conclusion, accept that both priests are at fault, to use your metaphor?
I would certainly want everyone involved to actually work in that spirit. But it takes give and take on both sides.
Shashi Tharoor, a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Karan.